As the clock ticks down on the parliamentary year, it's do or die for a stack of government reforms. Labor knows it won't win every vote, but wants to record where its opponents stand as it prepares for a summer of campaigning. I'm David Spears. Welcome to Insiders. We're entering the final week of Parliament for the year and the government is racing to clear the decks. Political donations changes and banning kids from social media are both set to pass with bipartisan support. That's despite fresh criticism from Elon Musk, now Donald Trump's right-hand man. A raft of other changes look set to fail, including caps on foreign student numbers, which Peter Dutton has decided to oppose. And in the midst of this legislative logjam, the Treasurer kicked off a heated row over how the Future Fund should invest its billions. There's a lot going on and not much time left as both sides position for the coming election.
OK, everyone, thank you very much for being here today.
Good morning, everybody.
We're good.
Good, OK.
We are in the last sitting fortnight of the year.
The government's in a spot of bother with its proposal to cap international student numbers.
Coalition and the Greens teaming up to block it.
You can't talk tough on immigration and then go soft on this.
The government has created one hell of a mess here.
Well, what's going on inside Peter Dutton's head?
There is accommodation being taken up at the moment by international students, accommodation that should be occupied by Australian citizens.
He supported a cap on the number of international students and now he says he's going to vote against the very same thing.
If the Prime Minister can't make decisions that are in our country's best interest, I will.
The opposition leader's reckless arrogance.
Reckless arrogance.
For this reckless, arrogant opposition leader.
We will get our country back on track.
Returning from summit season in South America.
Welcome back, Prime Minister.
Morning.
G'day, Treasurer. G'day, Shane. Today we are announcing new steps which are all about the future of the Future Fund.
The Albanese government is being accused of planning to raid Australia's massive sovereign wealth fund
to invest in housing, green energy and cybersecurity infrastructure where it's profitable.
The Future Fund is already investing in some of these areas.
Well, if that is the case, why do we need a change in the investment mandate?
This is about ensuring that the fund will continue to provide strong returns to the government's balance sheet while also supporting some of those big national priorities.
It's not there to invest in their pet projects. If we do not see any attractive assets in that area, we will not be investing.
The federal government introducing a bold bill to block kids under 16 from online apps.
Social media companies who break the laws will face penalties of up to $50 million.
Social media is causing social harm.
Our laws will enable parents to say no.
And the impact on the mental health of Australian children from social media has been absolutely appalling.
We will continue to engage constructively.
We look forward to working constructively.
The two big parties, desperate for distraction, desperate to get something done.
This bill no doubt could be made better if we had more time to get it right.
This is a stitch-up.
No real inquiry, no review, no scrutiny, because they've got no bloody answers.
Well, my guest this morning is the Green Senator Sarah Hanson-Young, who, as we saw, is arguing against both the social media ban for children and the government's plan to tackle misinformation. First, let's check what's making news. An agreement to transfer the remaining Bali Nine prisoners to Australia has received a mixed reaction in Indonesia. News Corp papers report a prominent member of Indonesia's ruling party has criticised the move, while a leading Bali tourism figure has praised the deal. The Nine newspapers, meanwhile, report one of the 5 remaining prisoners, Matthew Norman, cried tears of joy on hearing he could be home within weeks. The Prime Minister is moving to put in place a new national standard to tackle bullying. News Corp papers report Anthony Albanese has vowed to fulfil the dying wish of a schoolgirl driven to suicide and has written to state and territory leaders about the new standard. 1 in 6 students report suffering bullying in Australia. And finally, the government will investigate whether Meta has unlawfully promoted scams on Facebook and Instagram. Financial Services Minister Stephen Jones says it's not good enough. The social media platform doesn't have a system to enable blatantly criminal material to be removed. Well, as we enter the final week of Parliament for the year, get set for a series of votes that will help shape the election contest. Aged care reforms, a social media age limit and the changes to political donations rules will all pass and they'll be banked as wins by the government. But that's about all it can safely rely on. The housing bills, the caps on foreign student numbers and the Future Made in Australia legislation are all set to fail, but they'll still go to a vote. Labor wants to show where the coalition and the Greens stand so it can then campaign on these changes. The bill to tackle mis and disinformation on social media, however, has won no friends and it will be pulled. The government will walk away from that idea entirely. And don't expect to see any new limits on gambling advertising to be unveiled before Parliament rises either. Let's see what the panel makes of it. And we're joined this week by Phil Curry, Claire Armstrong and Paul Sakal. Welcome to you all. Look, there's a lot on that list of bills that will be crammed through, dealt with one way or another in the coming 4 days left in the parliamentary year. But let's just start on a few in the communications space. Social media, banning the kids. That will go through, has bipartisan support. But have a look at this. Elon Musk, in many ways unsurprising, he's had a crack at it. Seems like a backdoor way to control access to the internet by all Australians. Phil, on one level, you'd expect that from a social media owner, unhappy with this change, but he's now Donald Trump's right-hand man. So does that make things more complicated for the Australian government?
Well, I mean, potentially. I mean, there was a story in our paper on the weekend that this may, Musk might prevail on Trump to now to hit us with tariffs and so forth, but you can't kowtow to that threat. And social media companies have sort of been challenging the sovereignty of governments for a long time. I mean, and the other point too, David, I just wonder how long the Musk-Trump relationship's going to last.
Well, that's a good point.
I give it 3 months.
Everyone's got a stopwatch on that.
Yeah.
But while he is there, and he is incredibly influential, what are they calling him, the first bro? Does that make life more difficult, or as Phil says, do you just not kowtow to the guy?
No, I think it is. It's easy to ridicule Elon Musk. There's a lot there to poke fun at, but I think it is a serious problem for Australia now. Jim Chalmers has been working with Stephen Jones for months now on this idea of a digital levy to tax social media giants to pay for journalism in Australia and other kind of social responsibility stuff. And they've been worried since day one about the US being upset at Australia getting ahead of an OECD process to do a worldwide global digital tax.
Yeah.
This probably exacerbates that risk. I mean, if Australia directly targets Musk and Meta and social media firms as a sovereign state, that sets a global precedent. If Musk tells Trump, hey, the Aussies are trying to tax me, can you have a crack at them? That could carry some weight.
Yeah, and look, with the social media ban on kids, that's a world first as well. Australia's sort of leading the way, and that's why people like Elon Musk aren't happy about it. But Claire, here, it's a pretty popular move, do you think, still, this idea of the 16-year age limit? Is the government getting credit for that?
I think they're getting some credit from it, particularly obviously from the parent community and from a lot of young people. Equally, a lot of young people obviously not looking forward to the prospect of losing that particular avenue of social connection. But I think what will really be the deciding factor in whether they get credit or not is how they communicate and explain, and ultimately the model that they land upon. So the issue really is whether the government is able to see off the fear-mongering that from that tweet you see Musk leaning into, which is this is going to be some kind of blanket checking of every individual accessing social media and therefore a way to control them. We still don't know exactly how that's going to work. Well, we don't, but we do know that the onus is going to be on the social media companies, and if it's not in their business interest to insist that everyone hand over their driver's licence, I think you can be pretty confident in saying that's not where that policy is going to end up. And it's important to note that we already see that a lot of these companies, TikTok came out the other day and said it's kicking 1 million users off its platform that are under the current age limit of 13. No one's handed over driver's licence to be able to determine that particular thing. I think there's a real disconnect between the reality of the technological capability and what would be seen as more of a political argument. They obviously want no regulation.
And we did get a bit more detail this week on what's in and out. TikTok banned for kids, Facebook, Snapchat, but YouTube
But this is not the problem. We got some more detail this week, but it's all been done on the fly. There was conjecture about whether Snapchat would be involved. There was conjecture about whether YouTube would be involved. We had the Wiggles lobby the government to keep YouTube out. As Sarah Hanson-Young will go to soon, I'm sure, Michelle Rowland just a year ago, and Claire's reported on this too, she was anti doing an age verification trial for just porn websites. Then the coalition starts talking about it over the summer. There's a global debate that gets sparked by Jonathan Haidt, the really influential kind of moral political psychologist on kids and their welfare. News Corp runs a campaign in the middle of the year. David Coleman and Dutton in May start talking about a ban. And then all of a sudden, Albanese and Rowland make a decision, hey, we're doing this. But there is absolutely no detail about how they're going to do it. The government hasn't even started the trial that they want to do to determine the tools. There is still a tender out to figure out a company to do the trial.
Yeah, and look, Phil, you've got teenage kids. When we look at what sites are going to be in and out of this ban...
I don't know what they're on.
That's probably
the worst people to police are the parents. We have a clue what they're doing.
I guess this comes back to the government's main argument here, is that at least telling parents this is the age limit.
Yeah, look, I mean, Paul raises, and Claire may raise many sort of legitimate technical points and stuff, but the overarching thing that the government's having a go at this, it's all parents talk about. If you've got kids over 12, you know, you're trying to get them out of their bedrooms, off their devices, and you know, what it does to their heads and physically as well. I mean, it's a ubiquitous topic of conversation amongst parents, and I think there's no damage to the Prime Minister for having a go, right? But obviously, you know, if it doesn't work, then there'll be possibly consequences. But it's, you know, I don't know anyone in my cohort who thinks it's a bad thing, right? There's doubts about whether it can be made to work. But having a crack, I think he gets points for that. Correct?
I would say I think it's a bit of a disservice to the movement and the experts that are talking about this to say that it's about getting kids outside on playgrounds as well, which is territory that the Prime Minister's language has veered into recently.
Talks a lot about getting them playing cricket and...
The statistics are very clear around the rate of mental health, eating disorders and other really serious harms among this cohort, so directly correlating with the rise and just ubiquitous nature of social media. So we're not talking about some amorphous harm, and obviously there's going to have to be discussion around protecting the social spaces and connections that we want young people to still be able to have and access. And I think that's why it does come back to how the government have that conversation with the country, and this they have been dragged to it. I think Michelle Rowland thought that technically it wasn't possible. You cite the example in the US where some states did try to block, say, Pornhub, and the rates of people just using VPNs to get around it was huge. So there is a genuine technical debate to be had about whether it's possible.
But on the principle, they're all true believers now.
Not a loser.
On the government side.
Don't forget the Premier's started it.
And well, that's true. As Phil points out, there's been so much criticism of the PM for just not taking big steps and being bogged down in like bureaucratic inertia on gambling, for example.
Being bold enough.
So he's having a crack. He knows that people feel concerned about it. But those parents, how many think that banning it is actually possible? I know they're concerned, but how many actually think that banning kids from social media is possible?
But it comes back to this line from the government that it's more about the message it sends. Parents can then say to kids, everyone's on the same page, that there's a law now that says you shouldn't be on there till 16, and that at least gives parents a starting point.
It's a signal.
Misinformation, though, they're going to pull it. It, as I said, won no friends. Why? What went wrong there?
One of the most dead bills you'd ever put up in the Senate. It went wrong from day one. They released draft legislation, I think it was in the middle of last year. Every group you could think of, religious, civil society, media, came out and said this thing is problematic.
Too much policing of the internet.
Yeah, who determines truth? Does it exempt a priest, for example, who might make a comment in an online sermon about homosexuality being a mental illness, which a person of deep religious faith might say? And there was concern in religious communities about outlawing religious speech. They came back with a new bill this year. There were some amendments, not many. And then you've still got people like Anne Toomey, who's an eminent lawyer, saying that there were deep flaws in it, and it would likely lead to pressure on social media firms to make their own decision to avoid government action, that a piece of information, if it was too contentious, say about the process of an election, was misinformation. So it would err on the side of companies would err on the side of over-censor. And Anne Toomey makes some great points about the fact-checking mechanisms that this would rely on, where she says that fact-checking done by RMIT or AAP or others rely entirely on which experts are chosen to actually do the fact-check. For example, Megan Davis, the key Voice spokesperson, was doing fact-checks on the Voice campaign. So
there are plenty of examples, though, of blatant misinformation, of bots pushing misinformation, and this bill would have given ACMA, the regulator, the power to go in and stop some of that. Why couldn't there be any sort of deal on this? It just seemed...
I think there was a bit of a, rightly or wrongly, there's a perception that you're going to get one crack at this, and if that's the case, there are those who felt it went too far. It was policing opinion, for example, on the right, and those on the left who were upset about media being exempt, for example. So I would say that there was just no real likelihood of getting a consensus coalesce.
Too much grey.
Yeah. And then that leaves the gambling ads. I feel like we've been talking about this for a long time, but they're not.
Will be.
They're not going to produce anything this week, which means this year and probably maybe not even this term.
No, and that's just absolutely vexed gambling, whichever way they jump on it, isn't it? I mean, I've been saying for a while now, no blanket ban, just limits, and that doesn't satisfy the ban everything brigade, and if they do ban everything, they'll annoy a lot of powerful interests as well. So it sounds like it's going to spin in a too hard basket till after the election.
But the interesting thing on this is that it was one of the very first commitments that Peter Dutton made in a budget reply, was that there would be not an outright ban, it would be limits. And
his was no.
If you're talking about harm reduction, though, if there's a pathway to reduce some harm that you could then have built upon, it seems a missed opportunity that we could have potentially had limits on gambling advertising for over a year now, and that hasn't occurred.
Yeah, I mean, it feels right. There'd be criticism if it's only limits, not a complete ban, but wouldn't that be an improvement?
Yeah, it's not going to be a complete ban. The Prime Minister doesn't believe that that's an appropriate response or proportionate response. He also doesn't believe that this is as big a community issue as some of the Teal MPs and others think it is. And the underrated in this is just the intensity of the lobbying from people like Peter V'landys, Kerry Stokes. Huge media interest, huge sporting interest, very, very powerful behind the scenes.
It's selective too. I mean, it is selective. I mean, how many people are going to put Powerball's $100 million on Thursday night? How many people are going to drop that on their credit card and buy a bunch of tickets and
or go play pokies on Friday night?
It targets one part of gambling and not another. So
Well, time to get some thoughts on all of this from the Greens spokesperson for communications and the environment, Sarah Hanson-Young. To take us there, here was the bipartisan view on how a law to ban kids from social media will help.
The legislation brought forward by the Albanese government is, in the most fundamental sense, about helping families when they're sitting around the kitchen table to have that hard conversation about accessing social media. Our laws will enable parents to say no.
The social media companies for too long have abrogated their responsibility to care about Australian children. And when we look at the data on the mental health of Australian children, especially girls, we see devastating impacts. We welcome this legislation being put forward.
Sarah Hanson-Young, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start on this bill to ban kids from social media. You appear to be on a unity ticket with Elon Musk, of all people, when it comes to opposing this. Can you explain your position?
Well, we're worried that this is a blunt instrument that's not actually going to make the platform safer, isn't going to make being on the internet for kids or young people safer, or anyone for that matter. And look, I'm a mum. I've got a teenage daughter. She just graduated this week from Year 12. Hi, darling.
Congrats.
But so I know what it's like to be, as a parent, trying to work out where the limits are. How do you educate? How do you put in place some safety mechanisms? How do you have a conversation with your kids about what is going on and are they able to see the red flags? But just kicking young people off social media until they're 16 and then dropping them in the deep end with no guardrails, no lifeguards, no skills to deal with it is really not the answer. And of course, these big tech companies, what they don't want government doing is going to the heart of their business model. What young people offer these companies is their data. They have targeted advertising directly to them. They're targeted with advertising dangerous algorithms. That's all the stuff that drives the massive profits for these big companies.
I'll come to some of those aspects, but at the moment you talk about kids getting dropped into social media at 16. Well, currently they're getting dropped in there at 11 or 12 years old.
Well, and but this is the thing, David. We've got to do better at making online safer for everyone, and particularly our young people.
But the problem is, I mean,
prohibition isn't going to help that. We've got to put in place the guidelines and the guardrails.
But mums like you mentioned your experience. No doubt are able to talk to their kids about how to navigate this world. But a lot of parents may not be in that situation. And I mean, take a look at the figures. They show that since social media came along, we have seen a big increase in mental health hospitalisations, particularly for girls. It's up 81% since 2010. Is that related to social media? Well,
the experts are saying what we've got to do is engage with young people, put in place safe spaces online for them. I've been the Deputy Chair of the Parliament's long-running inquiry into all of these issues, and every expert we had said kicking young people off doesn't make things safer for them. Yes, we've got to deal with the mental health issues. Yes, we've got to deal with social isolation. Yes, we have to make sure young people know when something's wrong and they can raise a hand and say, can someone come and help me? But you don't do that by prohibition.
Can a 12-year-old do that? Are they equipped to be able to know when things are spiralling, when those eating disorders, mental health problems are starting to build?
But what we need to do, David, is stop that dangerous content being rammed down their throats. And you do that by taking away the profitability of the tech companies.
So
they make their money.
Explain to me how you do that.
We prohibit the scraping and the collection of data of all young people that is then sold to advertising, targeted advertising. We stop the dangerous algorithms being able to target
How does any government stop the algorithms you talk about, stop the feed, the content? How does a government police what a young person is seeing?
We do things like putting in place a duty of care on these platforms, like they've done. Well, they're not. They've announced it, but it's not on the table. And this is one of the things I'm going to do this week. When their social media bill comes before the Parliament, I'm going to move an amendment to put in place this duty of care, because they really care about young people. They'll do this now.
Okay, the Minister, to be clear, announced this the other night. She gave some detail around the plans. You're right, they haven't done it yet.
The EU and the UK are moving in this space, and Australia is well behind this. What the Minister wants to do is put in place the first age ban in the world without having it scrutinised, without having listened to the experts. It doesn't matter whether it's mental health experts or tech experts. People are worried about the consequences and also worried about whether it can even be done. The government doesn't want to hear that. That's why there's only a 3-hour Senate inquiry tomorrow before this piece of legislation gets rammed through.
Okay, there are legitimate points around the technical aspects of this, but I mean, at the end of the day, do you really think a Duty of Care Act or whatever it is can make social media safe for a 12-year-old, 13-year-old girl?
Well, I think a lot of parents, the tech platforms themselves, many of them have the 13 age limit. But what I'm interested in is making sure we get that harmful content off these platforms for everybody. That's what you've got to do. These companies are making profits, billions and billions of dollars, because this is their business model.
They'd make less if kids weren't on there at all.
Well, you reckon kids aren't going to get around this?
Sure,
I mean, look,
sure, but this would have an impact, wouldn't it? It would mean less kids on.
It's a blunt instrument that doesn't go to the heart of how these companies are making their money and why they're targeting individuals. The EU is trying to do this. The UK is trying to do it. Australia should work out how we make these platforms safer for everybody. Really hit these tech companies where it hurts. That's their business model. Have the guts to do that. Have the guts to hold them to account.
This would hit their business model. This is not going to help their bottom line, is it? Getting kids off social media.
Well, look, I think what this policy is about and why it's being rushed. The Prime Minister wants to end the year with Peter Dutton to say, look, folks, you won't have kids sitting on their phones at Christmas. That's what's going on here. And I was listening to a very astute, the words of a very astute 15-year-old this morning who said, this is so that the oldies can feel like the Prime Minister cares about their kids. Look, we need better reform than that and better laws than that.
To be fair, is it possible?
It's not even coming into place till July.
Is it possible, though, that some of the politicians, parents and others who want to see this ban do actually care
Of course
about the
they
kids?
care. Of course they care. And we all need to be doing better to hold these tech companies to account. But this is fool's gold. This is for politics, not for substance. And what I fear is that you put in place this, the tech companies will work a way around it, the kids will work a way around it, and government goes, oh, look, job done. We need to make it safer for everybody, not just safer for the Prime Minister to have a good Christmas.
Now, when it comes to misinformation and disinformation on social media, you've acknowledged this is creating serious harm to democracies, public health and public discourse and social cohesion. Why aren't you willing to back this bill to tackle misinformation and disinformation?
I read the comments of David Pempathy in the Sunday Mail, my hometown paper, this morning, and he said, this was with all good intent, this policy, but badly and poorly explained and implemented. The practical implementation was just not there, and that's true. And mis and disinformation is a problem right around the world. It's not just in Australia. We've seen it unfolding in the US during this election. But unless you deal with it properly, rather than this kind of half-baked option, which is what the government had put on the table, trying to be all things to all people.
So what should they have done? What would you like to see?
Well, again, we need to go back to how you manage the proliferation of the dangerous and harmful content. You have to tackle the algorithms, and you've got to tackle the sponsorship of these posts that go viral. The companies know when some companies, these companies know.
This bill made it very clear that ACMA, the regulator, would have the power to order a digital platform to take down misinformation, disinformation that was spread by bots and troll farms. So it would have specifically done that.
Well, it actually didn't have takedown powers, so that's a mistake. But
it did for serious harm and for those that content.
What they had to do was what this bill was trying to do was require the tech companies to self-regulate. Here's a bunch of areas that we're worried about. Very broad definitions, very vague definitions. You go and sort it out, and if we don't think you're sorting it out properly, we'll come and get you.
That's what they do at the moment. Isn't that the status quo? They're currently policing themselves.
Yeah, and this was more of it. Putting Elon Musk in charge of truth, I don't think is going to make the world
safer.
safer.
At the moment. So wouldn't this have been an improvement?
No, it was going to lock in the regulation to say that he could. And, of course, there was a huge carve-out for the mainstream press. So, if the Murdoch press want to post something online that is demonstrably wrong, that couldn't be tackled. But, if another organisation did, the tech company would have to make the...
But Elon
I don't think it matters whether it's Rupert Murdoch or Elon Musk.
But on social
I don't think they should be able to promote mis and disinformation.
Elon Musk has, I think, withdrawn, hasn't he, from the voluntary code of conduct. This would bring him under something that's actually more enforceable by a government regulator.
Yeah, well, I think if you think Elon Musk is going to do anything that the government say...
well, he's not if there's no bill.
It won't be unless you put in place the fundamental underpinning laws around their business model, the profitability, the algorithms, and making them legally responsible.
He'll be jumping for joy that they're going to withdraw the bill now, won't he?
Well, look, we need to go back to the drawing board. They stuffed this one up, David. They couldn't even communicate it. The minister hasn't been out there selling it. It's, as I said, the intent was well-meaning. But
you welcome it being withdrawn?
I do. I called on the government to withdraw it on Friday, and it's good that they have. But we've got to get back to the real problem, and that is how these companies profit off these dangerous posts. If you want to stop the dangerous posts spreading like wildfire, hit them where it hurts, and that's the dollar.
The other news that we've announced this morning too is gambling ads. There won't be any movement on that in this final week of Parliament for the year. What's your reaction to that?
Oh, we're doing, the government and the opposition are ramming through a ban on social media that was introduced on Thursday. We've got a joke of a Senate inquiry for 3 days tomorrow, but they can't do gambling. I mean, really, talk about priorities. We know the Parliament has been through a number of inquiries in relation to gambling. The harm that is done to Australian families every year because of gambling addiction is extraordinary. We are the biggest losers in Australia when it comes to gambling loss in the world. That needs to be tackled. And rather than doing the hard work, rather than standing up to the vested interests of the gambling companies and the big sporting codes and the big media companies, Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton are squibbing it.
On, Senator, one of your other portfolio areas, the environment, the government needs your support for its nature-positive bills. This would create an environmental protection authority, which would be able to impose much heavier fines for breaches that damage the environment. You've dropped demands for a climate trigger to be included in any environmental approvals, but you're still demanding a national ban on native forest logging.
We want an end to native forest logging.
So is that something you'll insist on, or if you don't get it, can you still vote for this bill?
Look, we've been really pragmatic here, and I just want to say this, I don't want to vote things down, I want to get things done. I'm trying to get outcomes in the parliament, whether this is on the environment legislation, the Made in Australia legislation, housing, schools funding is also listed for this week. We want to get things done and we want to help the government get better legislation.
So what does that mean on this bill, the nature positive laws? Would it be better to have them in place than the status quo?
Well, what we've said to the government is if you're going to put in place an environmental watchdog, let's make sure they have some rules in place that they can use to protect the environment. At the moment, the laws are so broken, and we've put aside our demands around the climate trigger because it was very clear that the Prime Minister was not going to budge on that. He said he had to win votes in WA, he wasn't going to move on climate. Okay, look, we'll have that fight at the election, and we'll come back after the new Parliament. But if you want a watchdog in place, give them some rules to implement to protect nature. We have all of these loopholes in our laws that allow the continued destruction of native forests and deforestation, koala habitat, the habitat of the swift parrot. It's out of control.
But if you don't get that, would it be better to have this EPA or not?
Well, I want the EPA to be able to do something. And here is an opportunity to do something. And I am worried, what happens if the Prime Minister doesn't win at the next election? And we've got Peter Dutton at the helm. Let's make sure there are some laws in place that actually protect nature before it's gone.
But are you prepared
stopping
to vote
the
this down, is
deforestation?
the question. Are you prepared to actually vote
No, we're not talking about voting anything down. We're talking about improving this legislation and working with the government to put in place something that is genuinely nature positive. I'm glad that the new offer that I put on the table last week has reignited conversations.
Have you been talking to Tanya?
I have been talking to the Minister, and
do you have more chats this week?
I hope so. I hope so. I want to get something done. Protecting the forest, protecting the Great Australian Bight, protecting koala habitat before they're all gone. These are the things that could be done and should be done and would be a win-win. A win for the government, a win for the environment, a win for Australia.
Is this more pragmatic approach, I think you called it, where you're willing to drop some of your demands on this and other areas, housing as well? Is this a reaction to the disappointing Greens performance in the Queensland and ACT elections, the drop we've seen in the polls and the popularity of Adam Bant? Is this a shift that we're now witnessing?
Look, I think it's about us saying we're at the end of the year, an election could be called any time, we want to get some things done, and we don't just want to hand the keys to Peter Dutton. I mean, if you're worried about what the country's going to look like after the next election, all you'd have to do is listen to some of the things he's been out spruiking, taking cues directly from Donald Trump.
But the Greens, I'm asking about the Greens. Is this a deliberate shift?
Well, we have come into the Parliament to get outcomes. We're here this week. We've put a long list of bills to the government to say these are things we're willing to get through.
Are you responding to what voters have been saying?
Of course we're responding to people because we, I hear people all the time saying, politicians just talk about themselves. Politicians don't do enough. Where's the focus on the environment? Where's the focus on cost of living? Let's get it on. I genuinely believe that the Parliament has an opportunity this week, the government has an opportunity this week. You can work with the Greens to get some good stuff done, or you can work with Peter Dutton that will empower him and give him more of a platform. And I think that's dangerous.
Final one.
I think that's dangerous.
Final one, Senator. On the 5 remaining members of the Bali Nine who have been nearly 20 years in a Bali jail, the opposition, and we'll play this in a moment, the Shadow Attorney General has raised some concerns and questions around all of this. Do you think it's reasonable to be concerned about returning them to Australia now?
I mean, cruel and heartless, frankly. Cruel and heartless. And if you want a glimpse of what a Peter Dutton government will look like, this is it. Don't be fooled of Dutton in lamb's clothes.
Sarah Hanson-Young, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, well, we're going to get to some of those other changes on the foreign student caps in particular that look like going down in this final week of Parliament for the year and explore why the opposition is opposing that one. First, let's return to our panel, and we're joined once again by Phil Curry, Claire Armstrong and Paul Sakal. Look, I just want to pick up on that final point made there about the Bali Nine. Michaeli Cash, the Shadow Attorney General, was on Sky News this morning and did raise a number of concerns around the agreement that's been reached to return those 5 remaining members after nearly 20 years in jail. Here she was.
It is now for Prime Minister Albanese to stand up in the front of the Australian people and say, what is the deal? What has he extracted in relation for the deal? What is Australia giving up in relation to the deal? How much is it going to cost the Australian taxpayer? Will they continue to serve their prison sentences because they have been sentenced to life imprisonment in Indonesia?
Cruel and heartless, said Sarah Hanson-Young. Look, what did you make, Phil, of Michaeli Cash there, pointing out these very serious drug offences and concerned about returning them?
Well, very hard line, I thought. I mean, I didn't hear that sort of complaint when the coalition was in government and Renee Lawrence had her sentence commuted in 2018.
She was one of the Bali Nine.
And you know, it's never been adequately explained either that when they were arrested, the role the federal police played in coughing them up to the Indonesians rather than arresting them in Australia, which they could have done, but they set up the trap. So, you know, they were arrested in Indonesia, they were subject to the death penalty. We had, you know, the previous Indonesian President Jokowi, you know, doing his He-Man thing and executing, you know, Andrew Chan and Myron Sukumaran just as a show of toughness. So you can argue these people have been through a lot more than they would have had they been apprehended in Australia, which was possible. And so on balance, I think most people probably think they've paid a fairly stiff price. If they come home, they come home. Yeah. You know, I just think that it's not a cut and dried thing, this at all.
Yeah, and when you look at comparable sentencing in Australia, 20 years is pretty close to our equivalent of life. 2 were killed, 1 died in prison from cancer. I don't think that it's unreasonable in terms of, you know, the pub test of Australia to think that we advocate in consular cases all the time, and I think in particular suggesting that there's a cost involved here. There's a cost involved in helping Australians overseas all the time, and that's sort of what I think the public expects the government to do for them, even in a situation like this.
I want to come to some of those other bills before Parliament this week, just to pick up though on something at the end there from Sarah Hanson-Young, just about this more pragmatic approach from the Greens. I thought it was interesting that she acknowledged, yeah, we're listening to voters. Yeah. And there was a pretty loud message from voters, wasn't there, in Queensland, the ACT, when it comes to the Greens.
Well, you hear a lot about the party not being the party of Bob Brown these days. I think when Labor people and Coalition people say that, Sarah Hanson-Young might be one of the current Greens MPs who kind of does fit that mould of a Bob Brown leader. Yeah. There are people in the party who think she should be the leader. That definitely struck a different tone at the end there compared to some of her Greens colleagues. Max Chandler-Mather, who's really on the other side of the spectrum of the party, did an interview with the ABC in Brisbane after the Queensland election saying, hey, we are listening. We know you have kind of sent a message of us potentially being too oppositional. We might need to have a bit of a rethink. So some signs of change.
What does that look like in practice this week? Do they pass the nature positive laws? Do they pass the housing bills?
Well, this is what's a bit disingenuous in that argument that the Greens often put forward, where they're all they're interested in is making Labor go further on environment, do more. But it's hard to argue that the Environment Protection Authority and the nature positive laws are made or broken on whether you legislate against forestry and native forestry logging. So I think on that bill in particular, given what they've now put forward as their request, it's not a very cohesive argument to say. You know, we saw Sarah Hanson-Young there trying to thread the needle on, well, this authority needs something to enforce. There is a wealth of environmental law that it could at least get started on. I don't think one hinges on the other. And that's been the same with a lot of the demands around the housing bills that the Greens have subsequently dropped. You don't necessarily need to get rid of negative gearing or have a 2-year freeze on rents to have a scheme like a shared equity to help people get into their first home.
The Greens have come into this week saying, oh, Labor will pass all your bills final week of the Parliament, so they might take a lot of credit for all those bills if they do pass, as the Greens tend to do. The Prime Minister might look back at them and say, you've absolutely shafted us for a whole term. I'm not going to give you a series of wins on the last week.
Well, he said 2 weeks ago, the PM in the courtyard press conference, we're making no more changes to these bills. It's take it or leave it. He doesn't fear the prospect.
No, he's happy to fight
of taking this to the election, and you know, we saw Sarah Hanson-Young's disdain for Peter Dutton, or Albanese's quite happy to lump them together as the no-alition.
That's right.
And it suits his purpose. I think that one of the problems the Greens have, they go out so hard with demands and then sort of approach having to walk it all back, and it looks like a climb down.
Well, talking about playing issues hard, let's talk about immigration and particularly those foreign student caps. So the government's plan was to pass this legislation that would give the Minister of the day, to be clear, be it Labor or Liberal, the power to set caps on what universities, different education providers, how many students they can bring in each year. Peter Dutton's decided to oppose this, and the Minister, Education Minister Jason Clare, couldn't quite believe it.
You can't talk tough on immigration and then vote against putting a limit on the number of people that come to this country every year. Over the course of the next few months, Peter Dutton is going to wander around the country pretending to be a tough guy on immigration. And every time he says the word immigration, remember this week.
There you go. No, so what's going on here? Why is Peter Dutton opposing it?
It's a good question. I suspect they're just playing chaos agent because they want to do their own policy. I mean, they don't want to give the government too many wins in the last week. They're going to give them the electoral reform laws. They're going to give them the social media thing, which Dutton flagged first, and I think he flagged this first. The students in his budget reply. And I suspect he wants to announce a pretty tough migration policy himself, and so they've looked at this and found something they can quibble with and say no, and they'll do their own.
A lot of people have drawn this comparison to Donald Trump and the Republicans blocking a border control bill that really frustrated Joe Biden, even though it would have done something.
Yeah, there's a bit of logic inconsistency here, particularly because what we know of what Peter Dutton has said in his budget replies has been this overall reduction of the actual permanent migration, which obviously doesn't touch students. The excuses or the reasons brought forward over the course of the week around why they oppose this, things like it's still too friendly toward the G8 sort of big capital city universities and it hurts some of the regions. Well, that doesn't quite work because obviously, as you say, the Minister of the Day can tinker with that number at any point. Also, there are some regional universities who who prefer it compared to the current system, which was just a ministerial direction that was a very blanket sort of approach to bringing in those numbers. Some of the other arguments the coalition had were, the caps are based on 2023 intake, which was the highest on record of students. Again, easily dealt with. So I think the not giving the government the win is the more logical reason for it.
Is that it? Is it the politics here of not giving the government any sort of win on immigration?
Yeah, there was two things. They did have a bunch of technical issues with the bill and unintended consequences for private colleges and various other people. But when you're cutting student numbers to the extent that both Labor and the coalition want to, there's always going to be unintended consequences. I thought it was an interesting week. They had a leadership meeting on the Sunday at which this was decided. Monday morning, there were some journalist inquiries from my paper and Julie Hare at your paper, Phil, saying that we'd heard that they were going to block the bill. I learnt yesterday or 2 days ago that the Dutton's plan was actually to vote down the bill as a surprise this coming week and not tell Labor its plans, keep the impression that they were going to back it and then give them an embarrassing loss in the last week. But because the stories were written on Monday morning, they didn't really have their defence ready as to why they were going to oppose it. So it created this messiness. There was Jason Clare went out and turned the heat on Dutton. They spent question time on it on Monday. Tuesday, Dutton comes out and does his first press conference in Canberra in like 6 months.
It was 10 minutes to question time.
10 minutes to question time, but largely to
a long time.
Got time for one question.
Totally. But look, he did get time to say this. He did get time to say this, and I guess this is the main point he wants to make.
Yeah.
This problem can be solved with a change of government at the next election. We'll make that announcement in due course. There will be deeper cuts because I want housing for Australians.
You got that line out, but how does he do that? How does he make the deeper cuts, the 25% cut in the permanent migration intake that he's promising, and that's very clear. How does he do it?
But also on that doesn't necessarily translate to more houses because a large cohort of people who apply for permanent migration already reside here on other visa types. Yeah. So I think it's a lot about, I mean, you can do it. You can just massively suppress across the board all the different visa category types. You're the government, you can turn the tap on and off quite quickly. Talking of unintended consequences, there would be a lot, particularly in skilled labour and migration. But he could do it, and it probably looks more impressive to take Labor's worst, highest number and apply an overall, across every visa type migration strategy that looks like a substantial cut than it is to piecemeal agree to the Labor plan.
I suspect he's banking on the fact that most people aren't aware of the intricacies of the immigration system and the visa system. He's going to come out with a number, and they'll sell that number during the campaign. My number's tougher than your number. I don't think we should get too in there.
Work on the detail later.
All
right. Talking about numbers, the Future Fund. We also, amidst all of this, saw the Treasurer announce during the week some changes to the Future Fund, which was set up, of course, by Peter Costello and John Howard back in the day. Now has a pool of $230 billion in all of our money that's building. Now the change is a new statement of expectations that gives suggested priorities to the Future Fund as to how it should invest, perhaps part of the Treasurer's values-based capitalism that he talked about last year. Phil, what will it mean in practice for the Future Fund?
I think it's a slippery slope, David. It is. I mean, the Future Fund was originally set up because, Peter Costello wanted to stop John Howard spending everything, and they sold the third tranche of Telstra and he shoved it in it. So we needed a sovereign wealth fund, and Treasury had warned him that had this massive unfunded liability for Commonwealth public servant superannuation on that old defined benefit scheme. So that was the original purpose of it, but it was set up at arm's length from government with its own act. And it was run by fund managers, and it was not to be interfered with by government. And to that effect, I think Howard, in their dying days, they toughened the Future Fund Act. I think it's Section 18A, they were fearful Labor might, when Kevin Rudd got in, use it to fund some of their ideas. So it's always been kept at arm's length from government. It's had a fairly good return, or close to 8% over the years. And as someone noted on the weekend, we've had 6 treasurers have left it alone, and now this one wants to sort of give it a nudge in a policy direction.
So these are 3 priority areas.
Yeah, but the thing is, David, we're talking about subjective assessments here, and these are Labor's priority areas, housing and green energy and stuff. So, and a lot of people might be cheering that on, but are those same people going to cheer it on if Peter Dutton wins the election, says, I wanted to build a nuclear power station? That's part of the energy. You're getting into dangerous territory when government's sort of trying to influence the way these fund managers should invest.
Let me show you what the Treasurer says about this. Here's how he explains it working.
What we've said is when the fund is comparing possible investments with similar levels of return, those investments should be cognisant of some of the big economic challenges and opportunities that we have.
And look, the opposition, they're deeply concerned, deeply opposed to this. They've also raised a question mark here about the legality, because the government of the day, under law, cannot direct the Future Fund how to invest.
He has said that the Future Fund will still invest with commercial returns in mind. Well, if that is the case, why do we need a change in the investment mandate? If the Future Fund can already invest in these priority areas of government, well, why aren't they doing so? And if they're not, well, then this is a direction. This is a direction from government to invest in areas that it sees as important, where its policies are failing.
I mean, Greg Combay, who now chairs the Future Fund, says it's not a direction. They've got legal advice that it's all okay, that they'll still make their own independent decisions on investments. Yeah. What do you think, Paul?
Well, they're saying it's not a direction. It's probably more accurately described as a nudge. It's if there's 100 investment opportunities there, and there's 20 that have that 4 to 5% return, and 10 are in government priority areas and 10 are not. Look at that 10. This is a government.
Pretty simplistic.
Yeah, but
it's pretty simplistic.
This government can put its priorities on. Yeah. I mean, the Future Fund is not owned by Peter Costello.
No.
There has been lively debate on the purpose of the Future Fund. The Centre for Independent Studies, which is a right-wing think tank, put out a paper last year saying, let's actually use this thing and start paying down government interest and debt, because we had no debt when this thing was envisioned, and that's a credit to that government. But there is debate about what this thing should do. Chalmers is tinkering with it, obviously open for debate. He's pretty friendless in like the elite economist and kind of economic prestige world where Costello comes out and smashes him, but it's government priorities.
Is this part of the general global trend we're seeing to governments getting more involved in trying to direct and harness.
Well, they're broke.
I think it is. And the thing that is confusing about what's transpired over the last week, and the government claims they didn't expect it to attract as much attention as it has, or I don't know why they would have thought that, given how unprecedented essentially what they were trying to do is. Why in the final fortnight of Parliament, when cost of living is the only thing anyone wants to talk about, are we having these debates? And you can extend that to half the agenda of the upcoming week. Why was misinformation listed as the first bill to debate in the Senate when we're not going to see the grocery code issue dealt with, when HEX is going to get pushed through on a guillotine? That HEX indexation change was promised in May. It's actually, regardless of whether you want to have an esoteric debate about what we should or shouldn't do with a sovereign wealth fund, it's why the heck are we having that debate
right now?
Liberals, when they saw the Future Fund announcement that morning, they were preparing to go into question time and have to defend the student cap thing. And they saw the Future Fund thing and they were like, thank you.
Hey, we've only got like a minute or so left here, but Phil, Claire and I have spent a lot of time together over the last week or so travelling around those summits, the APEC and G20 summits in South America. Just very quickly, what did the PM achieve, apart from obviously the meeting with the Indonesian president to lock in the deal on the return of those 5 members of the Bali Nine, but generally...
Well, he had to go. I mean, the G20 and APEC are very important summits, and he met President Xi, which is good. That's the 3rd meeting now in a couple of years, so keeping the China ball rolling.
Wasn't he on a charm offensive?
So, yeah, but... those summits ultimately, especially G20, ended with less than a whimper. It sort of showed us how divided the world is on.
Is that the reality now? The summits themselves come up with pretty bland
the sideshow. The sideshow is the real show, which is the one-on-one meetings, the bilaterals, the pull asides. I think President Xi had something like 30 bilateral meetings over the course of those 2 summits. That's an extraordinary number for him to have, and that is filling the vacuum that was created by Joe Biden being there, but obviously in his lame duck presidency era. And I think for me that was the most poignant thing to observe. That
I agree.
These other power shifts occurring, and the leader's statement is just a thing that happens at the end.
Yeah, but it's not inconsequential. I mean, that leader's statement has got weaker and weaker and weaker over the last 5 years since the first Trump presidency. Now, the emboldenment of China, of Russia, not giving a toss about language on Ukraine has been completely watered out of these end of that in itself is telling climate change. It gets watered down every year. It's just it's a bit like it's getting a bit sinister again the way the world's headed. And
all right, our panel: Paul Sakal, Claire Armstrong, and Phil Curry will be back very shortly with some final observations. Time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm photographer at large Mike Bowers. I'm talking pictures this week with columnist for The Australian, the one and only Jack the Insider, and welcome back to our penultimate show for 2024.
Penultimate. Very good word. Great to be here, Mike.
It's a great word, isn't it? Mr Albanese was off to G20 and to misquote a Peter Allen song, when my PM smiles at G, he goes to Rio.
Oh, very good. So there's a couple of blokes who've fallen off a cliff, but Sir Keir Starmer's approval ratings are now -38. They were +4 in July.
That is a cliff dive of a honeymoon.
That is.
Labor here is not looking too flashy either. Yes. Probably I'm that far ahead of you in the ratings. They always have to seem to do something when they line them up, the handhold.
President Xi just look happy there.
Yeah. Holding hands.
Deeply contented human being there.
You reckon he's got the steely grip?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Bad Yu Chow has put the Prime Minister of Australia on the menu here with his lobster and wine.
Yes, President Xi will get that succulence of the rock lobster and then something rather bitter after that.
Brett Lethbridge has got the 2 leaders here doing the superpower line dance. Good one, Albo. Tell us what you want to be again.
A renewable energy superpower.
Yeah.
You've got to start somewhere.
Very disturbing, David Rowe.
Very
the full Brazilian come back from overseas with a lovely tan line.
And that's gonna hurt.
I love the lobsters in with the hot wax here. Breathe in.
Yes, could get a bit messy.
Lovely David Pope. The Tasmanian rock lobster tries to buy more time.
Right then, who ordered the 45 Hong Kong democracy activists, and who's having the Newcastle Harbour climate protest exclusion hotpot?
Albo's probably going to buy, right?
Yeah.
Mark Knight, a bit of panda diplomacy. We're now best of friends.
He kind of lost a little bit of himself there. He's bleeding rather heavily, but they are very good friends now.
Jack, the government was trying to pass a bill to limit the increasing number of foreign students, but we had Mr Dutton trying the old Trump immigration playbook here.
Well, that's what Mr Golding seems to be suggesting.
If the cap fits.
You can wear it.
You can wear it. Fiona Katauskas has drawn a degree in political footballery. I don't know if uni's good value for money, Mum, but I am getting a free lesson in Australian politics.
Learning how to drop kick.
Yeah,
and
tough on immigration.
Tough on immigration.
It was a case of Back to the Future as Jim Chalmers revealed that we were going to make some changes to the Future Fund, and a lovely David Rowe with the Peter Costello Future Fund mausoleum.
Yes, I don't know why we just don't rip it all out and back a favourite in the last and shart in.
So what about we went halves on the nukes?
On the nukes, yeah.
Sounds kind of good.
Sounds kind of good.
Lovely Mark Knight cartoon here, Jack.
Yes, Jim Chalmers, Raiders of the Future Fund, and that I think is probably Peter Costello, the statue there.
The gold statue. What could go wrong? I think from the movie things start descending.
Yeah, great big boulder will roll on after him, yeah.
I'd like to see him with a whip. What do you make of the social media laws, Jack? I mean, there was a big brouhaha in Canberra this week as they introduced legislation.
It makes no sense to me. So we've got John Kadelka here saying, what's our position on carrier pigeons?
Yeah.
And I think the answer should be the pigeons must be 16 or older.
It's sad we had to say goodbye to the zingers this week as Bill Shorten gave a valedictory speech, and I must say it was a pretty good speech.
Beautiful speech, yeah, I enjoyed it.
He genuinely attracted bipartisan interest in the speech.
Yes.
Whole family came to watch. When he was stressed, he'd get all these lines, and we used to call it full Wi-Fi because it looks like the Wi-Fi sign.
Download a movie with that one.
You could, and then we had half Wi-Fi here when it was just
a little bit slower.
Farewell to the full Wi-Fi and half Wi-Fi.
Well done, Bill Shorten, on a great career and a wonderful speech on Thursday.
Yeah. Finally, our own Kathy Wilcox, cartoonist for the Age and Sydney Morning Herald, won the Walkley for Cartoons.
This is the winner, yes.
And it's, meanwhile in Australia,
in case of corruption or misconduct, break glass.
Yeah, with the whistle here.
Yes, and glass breakers will be prosecuted.
Yeah. Jack, it's been a great pleasure unpicking events this week. Thank you very much for taking the time.
My pleasure, Mike. And it's back to you, Spearsy.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Mike. Let's get some final observations. Paul.
Bill Shorten's valedictory was this week. Peter Dutton spoke after him in the House and really laid it on thick and said he was the Prime Minister, great Labor Prime Minister we never had.
Person on the Labor bench.
Probably just partly to get under the PM's skin. And then a few hours later at a party that Shorten held with quite a lot of high-powered people, Tanya Plibersek gave an emotional speech and talked up Bill Shorten's bravery. And some who know that Plibersek is no great friend of the Prime Minister thought it was a reflection on who she might have thought would have made a great Labor Prime Minister.
She was his deputy leader, of course. Claire.
On the issue of picking fight with big tech over social media age limits, the bill that's due to pass this week the penalties for it don't come into effect for 12 months. But there is an expectation that the companies comply with that 16-year-old age limit. A very obvious way to start with that would be with all of the people that voluntarily have already told them they are 13, 14 and 15, currently not captured by any ban. You'd have to imagine hundreds of thousands of children probably. Will the government seek to have that fight in this easy space, or will they wait to have the big one in 12 months' time?
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Phil.
Mine's really dull, but it might be interesting to the
really
viewers.
Selling it, really selling it.
So when we left Brazil the other day, because of the jet stream, which was going around the world, the Prime Minister's plane flew east instead of west, so it was 2,000 kilometres longer, but we did it 4 hours less than it would have taken if we'd gone the other way and with one less stop. But we did stop in Mauritius, and of all the bilaterals the Prime Minister had while I was away, he had one with the Prime Minister of Mauritius while we were there. And as far as I can ascertain, he's the first Australian Prime Minister to visit Mauritius and to have a bilateral with a Mauritian Prime Minister whose name I could not tell you. But
that's a fascinating final.
Look, it is. And the hour and a bit that we spent refuelling in, I found it fascinating.
He had to put his tie on and go off the plane.
Try and have a bilateral meeting. All right, look, thank you all very much for joining us this morning. Look, next week is our final program of the year. Join us as we award the Matt Price moment for 2024. We've got some good ones. And look back on another fascinating year in Australian politics. Now, finally, the government has no plans, as we know, of recalling Kevin Rudd as ambassador to the United States. But if there is an opening down the track, there's one candidate who loves the alliance and clearly has no shame. We'll leave you with the former Deputy Prime Minister, Michael McCormack. Thanks for watching.
Wise men say only fools rush in, but I can't help falling in love with this country's alliance.
Oh dear.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.